Hey everybody, this is Achilles Justice with the Philosophy Society. It is October 11th, 2023. We're at the Toronto Metropolitan University Library, room 661B. We have people in the room today, people online, people in the future, this will be the past for them. And yeah, I'm kind of just discussing for new people what the purpose of the group is, which I think is important. We always come back to, why are we here? You know? And that's an important question to always answer. I think at all times, like, what are you doing and why is it meaningful? And if what you're doing in the moment is directly related to your identity and your goals in life, then it's better for you, right? And there's evidence in psychology that shows that connects with having meaning in life. And so the simplest way to put it, the purpose of the Philosophy Society is a way to practice how to become a better person and how to develop well-being. And there's certain skills that we would, in a workshop setting, kind of practice those things. This specific module is more of the theoretical underpinnings of what to give you the theoretical tools to do it on your own. Because I'm only one person, I only have so much time, so I have to like do the general stuff first. And then once we expand, we can have like on Mondays is this and on Tuesdays is that, and then you guys can be facilitators, right?
So I have a suggestion. Of course, it will be up to you for today's topic. So what's happening in the world? People are trying to sort of like decide whose side is right, whose side is wrong, like the conflict between Israel and Palestine.
Sure.
So from your perspective, what can people do? People who are trying to sort of sort out through all this information and try to come up with their own unique conclusions. What can they do that, what would be the approach to help them come up with their own conclusions?
I don't know if anybody watches like late night talk shows, but they have like the segments. So this will be the World Today segment, right? And thank you, Beta. So we have the Israel-Palestine. Okay, so this is just a specific group that are fighting, right? And so there's certain things that we're just going to say are universally wrong, right? So we're going to have our universals over here. So one would be like murder, which we're going to define as the killing of innocent people, right? There's other atrocious acts. I'll just go with that one for now. So when Hamas launched 2,500-ish missiles into Israel, there was definitely the killing of innocent people, right? And so the other thing would be like civilian casualties would be like similar to that. It's in the context of war, though, or terrorism. And so the other area would be like Putin, or we'll call him Vlad. I want to talk to him directly. Sorry, as a quick aside, as I was in my weekend shaman psychedelic kind of like self-awareness moment, I had this thing where I was like, you know, and I started writing speech to the guy. Honestly, because everyone talks about Vladimir Putin, but no one says, Vlad, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. Like as a person. I don't even know if people in his social group do that to him, right? Like he's just in this weird state of consciousness where he's like, I'm the only person that exists, you know? No one just says, dude, like, let's just talk about it for a second. And so I had this itinerary to contextualize the conversation because he did that speech where he made fun of Canada. And for me, that just got me, right? Because it was pretty stupid how we had this standing ovation for this guy that fought for the Nazis. And then when Vladimir Putin is making a point that is correct, you know you fucked up. Like, it's like, wait a minute here. That guy's right? Oh, that's bad, man. That's fucking pretty bad. So anyways, Putin and the Kremlin. I hesitate to say Russian or Russia. The Russians are Russia, because it's not Russian people that are the problem. They're being used as a tool to some other end, right? And that's sad. That's not good. Notice the markers work. So it could be any kind of group. You know, there was other recent issues, but these ones just stand out. So if the Hamas group had something that they wanted to push forward some idea or whatever, being diplomatic is kind of like the way to do it. Resorting to murder or civilian casualties is always going to be wrong. And so even if, now, when we look at the difference between how Ukraine's responding to Russia, I don't think there's been an instance of Ukraine bombing a civilian target intentionally, right? And even if it happened once and we just forget about it, it's not like it's a consistent thing. Whereas like almost every day, like Putin and the Kremlin are bombing civilian targets, right? There's a clear difference. Intentionality is like here, right? So we want to like, so we're going to have objective criteria. So one is a pattern versus like an instance. And that's leading into intentionality, right? If something happens over and over and over again, it's not just a coincidence. It's not like someone just like, oops, I'm sorry that happened again. And that's kind of like the stance of Putin and the Kremlin, and makes the Russian people look bad. They have to suffer. Oops, sorry. Just check this. Yes. They have to accept responsibility for that. It's like someone who's playing for a sports team, you know, keeps on misbehaving in the game. Outsiders are just going to blame the whole team, right? If you look more specifically in detail, maybe you'll blame a specific player. But unfortunately, and the team is being used for those purposes as well, right? So I think that first we can have ethical universals. Let's just put ethical over here. Or social. Like ethical is like an abstract principle, whereas social might be a specific thing that happens in groups. You know what I mean? Like operationalized. So we have those two. We can add to this list, right? Like kidnapping people. Or what is the term? Sorry, I forgot. Taking hostages. Right? When is that a good idea? Like, when are you going to justify that? Like, it's going to take a lot to start justifying these things from an ethical standpoint. You have to prove, like, you could say, like, so from our ethical principles, we go back up here. So one of the only, there's this movie called, is it Unforgiven? Samuel Jackson's in the movie. And it's about this guy who has bombs in the city, and they capture the dude, and they need to figure out where the bombs are because it's going to blow up the whole city. And so there's this whole, the movie is just a big dramatization of the interrogator threatening to torture the bomber's family so that they can get the information of where the other, where the bombs are to prevent hurting these other people, right? And so the principle we're using here is utilitarianism, right? You could say it's justified to kill one innocent person if it saves 10 people. Okay, sure. Like, I get that. Usually we don't do that though, right? So when there's a bombing in some area and they're like, oh, there was like, there were casualties there, like, you know, but we killed this person. They justify that usually from a utilitarian perspective, right? Like if in the killing of bin Laden, for example, right, a couple of villagers died in the process in the crossfire, it was better for the world just because that bin Laden would have done some other crazy 9/11 thing, or even just the Holocaust, World War II, the dropping in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, right? They're like, okay, we're going to justify this because it's going to be less deaths over time. And that was the thing. Okay, so we can have other ethical principles. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, yeah, but what about this? Non-maleficence. You're not supposed to hurt anybody. Right? I have to make sure I'm in the shot here. Sometimes I go off the shot and it's like, who is that guy? So it's weird. So this is where we get into like an ethical paradox or conflict. And so we want to be able to say, well, how do we just, let me go back to the justification bit, right? How do you justify it? And so this is like, now we have to talk, because there could be different opinions, I guess you could say. But we really want to make an argument here. And so in a code of ethics, like so for a doctor, non-maleficence is number one. This would come first, right? And if you have non-maleficence in these kind of contexts, that would mean that you cannot do any kind of counter defense or some kind of assault if anybody was going to get hurt, right? And so we have to talk about that. Like, what are we going to do, right? And a lot of the times they'll make they will be utilitarian. They'll try to reduce the amount of civilian casualties as much as they can. And I think that something else is like, I don't know where to put this, is accountability. So it's like, if you did make a mistake, you're like, okay, there was a weapons facility, and we knew that they were going to be bombing a hospital next week, so we destroyed the weapons facility, and we prevented the bombing of the hospital. Here's our evidence, right? You guys can look at it and whatever you want to say to it, right? Problem with that is that if we convey too much information, then it's like other parties can use that to have counteroffensives and plan against us, right? So we want to limit the amount of intelligence that's coming out. So, but the accountability part, these shows that you're thinking about this stuff. And you're saying, but in the process of bombing this thing, one of the shrapnel went by and hurt this person. So we're going to take care of their family, and this is what we're going to do, right? So that there's some responsibility here. I think that's better than nothing, right? You can't just say you're never going to hurt anybody. And when they say that Russia has to rebuild Ukraine and the sanctions are imposed on Russia, again, it's not just Putin, it's Russia that has to pay the cost. That's why the Russian people, it's in their interest, all people, to rise against a tyrant. Because if that tyrant is representing you and your whole team, then it's not good for you, right? Because you have to pay whatever the damages are. So this is how I look at it, right? So there's the world today, and that list can keep on going. It's going to keep on going. The next big one's going to be like, when, AI version 3.7b, attacked like this whole continent because drones went down and killed like 1 billion people. What? Yeah, like honestly, it's like science fiction, but there could be like a base on the moon that AI created, and then all these drones fly down and just fucking kill people because somebody did it. You know what I mean? That sucks. And now what are we gonna do? I don't know. Elon Musk is like it threatens civilization, right? So if our squabblings, and that's the thing, it's like our technology, analogous to like the Christians say that God created man or humans in his own image or whatever, right? Isn't it the same for AI? So if we are aggressive, greed-mongering, crazy people, how do we prevent programming that into the AI? That's weird. Like, that's not a good thing. We want a benevolent AI, like a super good AI that takes care of us, like, So, okay, did I respond to what you were trying to say?
So basically, the categories are universal morals and ethical principles. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, okay. Through that, then, all right. So basically, ethical principles. You are saying that it's based on the culture as well, right? Whereas it could be cultural.
Okay, that's one quick thing. So there's like the cultural part is actually, I would say, morality. And what happens is one cultural group like Hamas. So there's this one video that's really upsetting of a woman who was they kidnapped and took hostage, and she was not doing well, and they were screaming, "Oh, God is great," right? As a celebration of what has occurred. So from their cultural perspective, if they had a moral check mark, they did the right thing. And other people agree with them, like Iran. They're like, yeah, you guys are doing great over there. Whereas when you look at it from a different cultural lens, or more of an objective lens, that woman did not agree to being murdered or anything else that happened to her, right? And so that's a quick objective criteria to say that that was wrong. Whether our cultural group is a bit more objective than not is a different thing, right? But those criteria are to be this is, again, some philosophers do not agree with me. They're like, you're wrong. But I'm going to say this because it's useful and it's easier to understand how to solve problems if we approach it this way, right? The application of these objective principles is a practice, right? But the values may be aligned with one or other principles, and they may just disregard certain principles. And the culture is the expression of those values. So I said it just do that little. I didn't have that in earlier.
Yeah, I think this sort of thing will be ongoing in the world. You know, we have since 2020, we have seen like divisions becoming bigger and bigger. I think so. I think these sort of conversations will be ongoing.
Yeah, and well, yes. The sad part is we don't want the conversation we just want it to stop. We want to talk about other stuff. You know, we would prefer to never have to talk about this again, like in a history class. Remember when we used to kill each other? What are you talking about? You're crazy. You know, like, who does that? You know? It's like in certain areas of the world, we just take for granted human rights so much, or like healthcare. You're like, what? You didn't go to the doctor? No, I just did. You know, I didn't think I had the money for it. Dude, don't you have an OHIP card? Yeah. Do you know what that means? No. Right? Like it's like
a desire for a golden age. The golden age as the golden age, right?
You tell me.
Yeah. Seems like you have that desire.
Well, I don't know. Maybe like you're like you're putting the microphone on Achilles. Like, hey, I think so. I think you know, we could talk about utopia and stuff like that, but honestly, like the problems between like human versus human pales in comparison to a human versus something else. There's something that's way, like, we're pretty dangerous, but there's something that's way more dangerous, that's worse than AI. And AI is not even really that bad yet, right? It's still like fiction Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger thing. And like the thing that's way more dangerous is the cosmos. As loving as the cosmos might be, because I am part of it, it is also the end of me. For example, when the sun explodes, Earth will not exist. Like when the sun expands, Earth will be inside the sun. So there's no way we're going back from that one. And if people want to pray on the planet, on whatever is left of planet Earth up until the point where it doesn't exist anymore, you can do that. But me and a large group of people are going to go into some kind of spaceship and go somewhere else, right? And I'm good with that. Like I leave them to their, and I'll say there's room for you on the boat. We can even use the Noah's Ark example and say, hey, I got this friend, his name's Noah. All you guys can fit, you know, as long as you don't hurt anybody. Don't be hurting anybody on the boat, you know. You believe whatever you want, that's fine. But at the same time, so when we have religion, right? And then we have like beliefs, because there can be other like extremist beliefs that lead people to weird behavior or unethical behavior. Being philosophical, I would say, is more higher ordered, because it is the thing for which we use to understand these things. I can't use religion to understand religion because it becomes circular. But philosophy as a mechanism is process and content together, right? So like understanding logic and reasoning and fallacies is a process-oriented mechanism. Whereas we can talk about like eudaimonia, well-being, or to live well, the good life, right? And that's like a specific thing that came from Aristotle, you know? Or we can talk about like Atman, like the Hindu view of self, that I am the universe and the universe is me. It is all Atman, right? That's a content thing. And to understand that, we can use philosophy to make sense of it, right? And so that's why the philosophy society is just society. There's nothing different. It's just I'm just being explicit about it, you know? Because you're being human to think about something, you're being philosophical and reason. What does this mean? How does this make sense? What else are you going to do? And so part of the problem is that people get these beliefs and they just go straight to action X, whatever it is. And there's no self-reflection here, right? And so in Stephen Covey's book, the course I would like to do soon, he talks about stimulus and response. Super basic. And right here is where you can be proactive. And so through an awareness of our environment, myself, whatever is going on, right? And a certain sense of like, because like you have to slow things down a bit. Like there's being proactive and then there's being reactive. Being reactive is just responding without thinking, going on habit. This is just the cognitive apparatus and behaviors that I, at this point, have, right? And that could be good or bad. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe you have really good instincts. Natalia's got her boots on and someone's being violent. She kicks him in the face automatically. Hey, brother. How's it going? Nice to see my friend. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do a review. Does Achilles know what he's talking about? Can you repeat it in a more concise way? So Behzad suggested we talk about what's going on in the world today, right? And what can I ask, what's the motivation? Like, what's the reason? Why do you want to talk about that?
It was just a suggestion. I wanted to see how you feel about it. It seemed like you thought it could be a good topic. So yeah.
All right, thank you. That's good. The way I feel about it is horrified. So that's the long-winded answer. The short answer is horrified. I'm very upset. And sometimes angry, and I have to calm myself down to not get angry. Because it's just so upsetting to me. Okay. Because when you see these people suffering, I just makes me quite upset. Right? So we brought the issue of Hamas bombing Israel and what to do about that. And I said, well, there's a bunch of kind of things that are going on in the world. Another one would be like Putin in the Kremlin attacking Ukraine. There could be problems in the future of AI. And I give a little science fiction example. And then the other one is just like the big dooming cosmos, good or bad. The sun will explode. Sun will die someday, right? And so there's all these things that we have to deal with in our world. And so how do we make sense of this? Like you asked, well, who's right, who's wrong?
Well, my question was, what can people do to come up with their own conclusions? So anyway, like different people could have their own different conclusion, but what would be the process? It's not necessarily that there is a right or wrong answer, but there could be a process that one could at least try to follow to reach their own unique conclusions.
Just to respond to that, would diversifying one's news sources be one method?
So in awareness, diverse news sources, but also the evaluation of specific of those news sources. Because how are we going to determine like what is right and what is wrong, and what evidence is good evidence, right? And the diversification point, why is that important?
Because it allows you to compare what each outlet is saying, and from the common denominators of the news that they provide, you can then make an inference that what they are saying on that certain point is correct because of patterns. But then that's also problematic, I think, because they can also be patterns of lies.
So the way we just solve that is our critical thinking stuff.
Okay.
But we need the diversification to make sure that we're not just in like an echo chamber.
Of course, yeah.
Right? So we'll just have our critical thinking over here. And then scientific thinking. So many moons ago, maybe 2 fortnights, we had a module, a course. We went through the website, the chapter on critical thinking. So in practical philosophy, it's like basically the book. It's unpublished, but it's like an intro philosophy book. It would be a book just for this, right? So there's the chapters on critical thinking, and we go through all the logical fallacies. And then there's a chapter on biases, right? And we went through scientific thinking. So they're almost the same, but they're a little bit different, right? Scientific thinking is more geared towards like the evaluation of empirical information and evaluating theories, right? Whereas critical thinking is the evaluation of like beliefs, evidence, logic, inferences. So it's a bit more higher order because it kind of just deals with all kinds of reasoning. Whereas scientific thinking is like the application of theory and evidence, you know? Or not just application, but theory construction. Okay, so the world today, boom, we have this stuff. And then how do we derive our own conclusions? So let's have some tools we can use to figure this stuff out. So One is there are universals, right? We have ethical principles we can apply to whatever's going on, and then we can look at specific social phenomena, right? So for example, murder. When is that okay? Basically never, right? And there's other atrocities, like bad things that happen to women usually, which is bad. Then there's war/terrorism, where we have civilian casualties, and then hostage situations. All of these things are happening right now at the Hamas situation, right? Whenever there's a conflict, and so the contrast would be when Ukraine is defending themselves, they make an active effort to reduce civilian casualties. Like you'll hear like, oh, Ukraine bombed the place and 2 people died. And then the Kremlin bombed the place in Ukraine and 70 people died. There's usually a big difference, right? Like when they bombed the Blackport ski facility, right? Like 12 major military figures were killed. That was the purpose of that bombing, right? Whereas you get like apartment buildings being destroyed and just only civilians really live there, which is not right. So these are social phenomena that we can kind of say are always bad, right? And then we go up here to our ethical principles. This is what we're going to use and this is a little convoluted, but these are what we're going to use to justify the acts we have. And so any kind of world theory, we're going to take the universals. So you could say, well, how does this apply to the cosmos thing? Because the cosmos is not a person, right, doing this stuff. So how do we discuss the ethics? Well, it would be us taking action. Are we being proactive or are we being negligent? Are we doing something about it? Right? Like if there's a huge fire over there, just don't worry about it. Let's just chill out and everybody dies. That wasn't a good idea. What are you doing just sitting around doing nothing? At least move, right? You can feel the heat, you can see the smoke. So if we're aware, like in 150 years or something like that, there's an asteroid that may collide with Earth, you know? And that's not good. That's probably a bad thing, right? Most likely a bad thing. And so we want to do something about that. And so Neil deGrasse Tyson's like, well, we need to understand the composition of the asteroid because it might not be fully solid. So if you throw a nuke at it, so like we have our asteroid, this is trying to apply this stuff to this thing, show how it doesn't always, it's not the same, right? And we throw a missile here, and then it just goes into a bunch of pieces, and all of these pieces are still going in the same trajectory, right? You haven't done anything. Now you just have a bunch of mini asteroids coming down to Earth. That's not good either, right? If it's solid and you hit it and then you derail it and it starts going this way, okay, well, sure. But that just depends on the composition of the asteroids. We need, the reason that we send probes out to these interstellar objects is so we can understand their composition better. That way we can do something about it. So it's not a person. We're not going to anthropomorphize the cosmos and say, the cosmos is mean to me today because I fell down when I didn't see my shoelace. Gravity just hurt me. You know, that doesn't make sense. No one says that, right? You need to take initiative and say there is a danger in the environment and it's up to me to do something about it, right? Doing a bad summary because I'm talking about new stuff. Okay, so the other thing we could do is accountability, right? In how we're resolving these conflicts, it's important to be accountable so that people trust us. And then when you do fuck up, because you're doing a pretty difficult thing, right? If you take responsibility for the fuck up, then people kind of, they can trust you more. They know that you're actively not trying to deceive them, which is important, especially when you have a lot of power, like a huge military complex. And another objective criteria to, when we're looking at how people are dealing with these problems, we can evaluate ethically, with things we're evaluating are social phenomena, right? But we're looking at the patterns versus an instance of a thing. Is this repeating over and over again? Because if it is, that's showing that systematic nature of the thing is showing us there's intentionality behind it, or there's more evidence to indicate that, right? And being philosophical is a higher order process than being religious or just having beliefs, because philosophy is the thing that understands itself through its process and content, and that same process and content are really that's what we call philosophy. You don't call logic religion. Those are different things. But logic is how we understand religion, or we understand our beliefs, and the evaluation of our action and behavior will lead us back to this, right? So that's why it's connected to philosophy, because it's like, well, what's going on with this person here? This is a really bad question mark. That's supposed to be. Why are they doing the things they're doing? And I asked that earlier. I said, what, just, that's like the first question I almost ask every time. Why are we here? What am I doing? You know? And it's important to be able to make sense of that for ourselves and for each other. And people will question you, like, what are you doing? And then what do you say? And you're like, oh, I feel uncomfortable now. Now I'm ashamed of not knowing what I'm doing. Like it just is embarrassing. If I have some weird behavior, like I'm like I have to stop. It's weird for me. Then that's the point, because I'm socialized to not do weird shit. You have to be professional and like act in a certain way. But if you do weird stuff, they're like, you're schizophrenic, and maybe you are, which would mean that when you respond to what are you doing, maybe you can't respond at all, or you're like, there's a carousel and I have to move with the carousel just because that you have a whole discourse there. Like it's meaning for you, but it does not connect to what everybody else is doing. And then we call that psychosis. We have a name for it, right? Maybe in the past you'd be a shaman or a witch. Maybe there's some wisdom there. They give you some drugs or something like that. You're the mushroom person, maybe, you know. But you know, if you're not hurting anybody, if I start to put a fork in the outlet, okay, maybe you're going to hurt yourself, right? But then when it comes down to throwing a helpless woman in the back of a fucking truck and doing bad things, and now, you know, and then screaming, God is great, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. You know, God is great. Okay, what's God? I'm going to kill you. Wait a minute. Whoa. Process and context. So inquiry, which is asking questions, right? That's allowed. You're allowed to ask questions. But when, in a lot of ways, certain religious ways of being, not all religious ways of being, but certain ones, like what's going on with the Hamas, they do not allow philosophy. They do not allow to ask questions. And that will, as soon as I say, well, why is God great? What is God? Death. Like right away. You're a blasphemer or you're a heretic. You know, and we'll do worse to you than we did to this person. And this person just, you know, was just being human. i.e., you weren't wearing a hijab, or, you know, you were dancing at an EDM party or whatever, or you showed some breast or something like that, and then it doesn't mean you deserve death. So it's important. And now you say, well, why is philosophy valuable? Why is it important that it's higher order than religion? Well, it's not even really a choice. It's just the nature of the thing itself. That's just what it is. Well, what do you mean? Well, because being philosophical necessarily means that you're being reasonable, right? Which is an understanding of forms of logic, right? It's to determine meaning, which is making sense versus nonsense. So when we say sense, a lot of okay, most of philosophy, and this was the beginning criticism, is it's linguistic. I'm using language, right, to describe the world, to describe myself, describe my experiences, right? That takes most of, sort of my terrible writing here. That takes most of what it means to be philosophical. But then there's just being. There's just like being wise, being philosophical, seeing things, making good judgments, having good decisions, having a healthy social interaction, right? And that's also wise too. And part of the problem of the trajectory of being philosophical is it's just really focused on the language part. Predominant, that's all it really is. Which is, it's important that philosophers really got a hold of that to make sense of things. That's a big deal. But we kind of forgot something. We need to go back, right? and maybe start over again a little bit, which is totally fine. Because that way you don't lose anything. And we have to figure out what it means to be with oneself and then be together. And that's wise as well, right? And so religion is a different thing. It says that there is this specific content that they say is true, right? And there is no questioning. It's based in dogmatism. And if when you say religious, if that means like, oh, we eat a lot of food and like we get together and we're happy, we hug each other, we're happy, you know, that's good, that's fine. But when it comes down to the world today, when people are dying, right, that's not okay. And so then we go back to, why are we here? What am I doing? And we're going to use philosophy. Like I was, at one point, a professor got upset with me. She's like, you have an agenda. You're using philosophy. I'm like, okay, yes. He's like, Hitler did that. And I'm like, okay. I think we have a different understanding of how philosophy can be used and even just an evaluation of how I am using it, right? Because the way that I'm trying to approach this and give us all the tools that we can use, I'm going to be circular here, all the tools that we can enact for ourselves and embody for others, is supposed to be unbiased. And the reason for that is that anybody could follow the same line of reasoning and come to the same conclusion. In the same way that the scientific method would work, there's a methodology, right? And if you follow that methodology correctly, you'll get to the same answer. And so, well, what are you talking about? How does this make sense? So there's a person, right? There. That could be any of us. And then there's the most PM philosophical method, and then there's the end or outcome. And it doesn't matter who this person is. As long as there's a certain methodology that is followed, they can come to that end conclusion, right? And the hope would be that if we are philosophical, people can be mindful of their actions / behavior, and you won't get these outcomes anymore. So when you say golden age, I would just take the strong part and I'll just say we want to strive to the limit of utopia, whatever that would be. And really it's just, I just categorize all this stuff as mental health problems, just at a major social level. You know, people are being sociopathic when they are doing heinous acts like this. And that's not good, right? There is, because then you get into problems of ethical relativism. They're like, who are you to judge? You're implementing your Western view on things. Well, what does that even mean to say that? You know, just because it's the fallacy of tradition. Like, you're not making sense again. Like, okay, let's talk about, like, it's like when you're being reasonable, it's like you're standing on top of like this like little, like Nietzsche talked about the tightrope, right? There's a tightrope walker and they're standing on the tightrope and then everyone's watching them like, oh, they might fall, kind of thing, in Zarathustra. And so when you're criticizing somebody, you engage in this like interlocker kind of like dialogue discussion thing, right? And it's like, who's right? Like we can talk about the philosophy guys being arrogant and shit. And it's not really about being right, it's just about being correct. And that's why I love math. You know, it's like I'm cool with being wrong. Just show me how, right? So that I understand. Because if you show me why I'm incorrect, now I won't be incorrect next time. I'm only gonna fuck that up once, right? Hopefully, right? And you're like, oh, you did it again. No, right? So when they like, okay, colonialism, going into a place and killing people because they don't do what you want to do, and they're upset with you taking their land. Yeah, okay, that's obviously a problem. Sure, yeah, we can agree on that. Sure, right? But it's wrong to say that if I have a language or a set of symbols that explains the process of water boiling at a specific altitude or degree of gravity anywhere in the cosmos, that is not relative to Western culture. It's not. Maybe it came from Western culture, sure, but anybody can use it. Anybody. Doesn't matter where you come from. You could literally leave a tablet or something of the nature, and then everyone died. Maybe there was like a little colony of humans, and then 5,000 years later, they found your tablet. And they're like, wow, this is how, it's the periodic table of elements. We didn't know about that. And they determined some discovery, right? From your language or whatever. It has nothing to do with it being from a specific culture, because that would mean that reality changes and is determined by our values, which is not true. We may pick out salient information, like, this is a marker. It is used to make markings on the wall, right? And if I had a bunch of objects like a stick, a ruler, right? This just be like, oh, well, that does that because you learned it, right? It sticks out to you. Or you're like, oh, I need caffeine. You're like, well, this is what the coffee is. Like that comes to us early on and as we're growing in an environment. But like it's a little arrogant, like we said before, and almost psychotic to think that your cultural group, the way that they see things, just the act of seeing it that way changes reality. Like that's craziness. That's insane. That's not true. You might like certain things or engage in artificial selection. I love these oranges. We're really going to like make these oranges great. Okay. I fucking love that, man. Like, or we've bred this breed of dog. My dog, Sophia, super cute. I'm so happy with all of the humans that brought her to me. The thousands of years of humans that made that smiley little face on that dog, That's amazing. That's great. And that's humans' values influencing the development of that which exists. But it's not the case that like Niels Bohr just made electrons behave in a certain way because that's where he came from. That's craziness. That doesn't make any sense, And so, well, what do you mean? Like, so we go back to the Western critique, right? And institutionally, there may be biases with research that's published, or again, salient things that people go out and they're like, we're going to study that, or who they listen to, right? They might not listen to certain individuals, and that's not fair. And that's up to us. That's a problem with us. It has nothing to do with the cosmos, right? The cosmos just is. If the sun was never going to explode, the sun would have never been created in the first place. The kind of thing that the sun is, it needed to have this cycle. And that's okay, because we needed that for us to be here. It's up to us not to waste time. When we say the world today, there's a connotative meaning to that. You're like, yeah, that means a certain thing. There's a bunch of bullshit going on. The world today, really we would want it to be, we've figured out a way to transport all the humans to the nearest habitable environment. And whenever you want to go, it's safe to go. We've had 4 generations of successful humans there. They're actually healthier. What? Yes. Are you serious? Yes. Right? That was the world today? Oh, okay. Interesting. All right, brothers. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the topic.
Thank you.
Very good.
Nice to see you.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
my friend. I'll see you guys next week, okay? Say, there's 2 ways to look at what is, right? There's what's going on. There's the descriptive. And there's what we want it to be, the normative, right? The ideal world. And so the world today is necessarily descriptive in its essence. And there's always going to be a descriptive account of what's going on. But what we want to do is have some means to get to the normative. So we have to identify, where do we want to be? Right? We want to be in a place where murder is not really a thing. That's not a bad place to be. And there's a way for us to evaluate what that normative state is. Right? Does anybody have it? Okay, what do you think? You good? What do you think?
I'm wondering how you think about things that are not able to be approached by logical reasoning.
Like what?
And was reading this author Ruth Chang, and then she talks about choices not being like one choice not being better than another, but they're all apart. And then it's like it's the reasoning behind why you prefer one choice over the other that like that's a representation of how to live your life. So like I guess I'm just wondering, like I'm sure we can have a fundamental assumption of our value and then use logical reasoning to build up on top of that. But then what do we think about the fundamental assumption itself then? Because I think that's not something we can approach by reasoning.
Some things we have to be empirical about,
Mm.
and we may not have a language for it yet. And I'm actually fundamentally an empiricist. I believe all there really is empiricism, and there's like pseudo rationalism, but it's still an experience. Me in reasoning as a process is the experience of reasoning, and that's where our errors come in that realm, right? So like, so there's qualia, right?
Mm.
Things that can't be described with language. Like it's like the smallest unit, like the redness of red, you know, or like being on a roller coaster, you know, or some people say like being in love, you know, or like different things. And you can only understand those things when you're in it, or like having children, being a mother, right? And so in some ways, we would use language to direct people to the experience, right? So that when they, because it's different kinds of information. There's the linguistic information. Let's go back to this. The language part, philosophy has been predominantly language. There's a linguistic part, but there's this being part. There's actually more fundamental than the language part. And so for certain choices, it might be instinctual, right? I might have a feeling. And so what I do is I go with my feeling, and then in reflection, I understand it, and then I explain it in a reasonable way to you. You're like, oh, that's why you did it. It kind of doesn't make sense, but I understand what you mean. I don't know what it's like, but I understand. And you're completely correct. Like some choices, like in the selection of a mate, you know, like if you like this person or this person, a big part of it is how do they make you feel? You know, like you can have like a criteria, you know, like when I'm dating women, they'll be like, recently, this person was like, well, there's these other guys in my life and I'm not really sure, but the reason I like you is because of who you are. And these guys have way more money than you. And that doesn't matter to me. And I'm like, I get it. You know? And part of that is that person's values. So their orientation towards character versus resources is based on what they value. So they'll feel more inclined, right? It may not be able to even explain it really. They just feel that way, right? And or even when you're hanging out with a brother, you're like, hey, we're going for a beer or something like that. Like Jeremy and I went for a beer last time after the thing, you know? And some people's company is different than others. Like when my other friend joined us, it changed the social dynamic. It felt a little different, right? And that's okay, you know? Okay, I'm gonna stop. So what do you think?
Yeah, right. That makes a lot of sense.
Because sometimes we don't know, like if you say something, it's like when you're younger. Like if you're like 15, I remember when I was like starting to get confused about shit. I was like, what do I do? Like, what do I do with my life? This is crazy. I have to get a job for what purpose, you know? And what do I do then, right? And you're trying to make sense of stuff. And it's like, you can't explain it to that person. I can't use words to like accelerate the development or the growth, or use words to replace the experience. You know, you have to just do it. And part of the problem with that is like the suffering problem. Is that people or like anxiety or fear. People are like, I don't want to, I'm scared. I don't want to have to go through it. You know, or it's too much for me. I don't know how to deal with how I feel right now. Right. And then you call Achilles and he's like, you can do it. I know it's hard right now, but we're just going to be okay. Right. And then we figure it out. Right. And so part of it is going with the tangent there is that's where the social group comes in. And other, I read some Sartre before, and I have this distinction between self and other. You know, and you are the self. They are selves, external selves. When we talk about this, goes to my fundamental theory as well. Daniel Dennett says consciousness is a committee of selves. Right? I think that's important. When someone does something, like when someone's upset, or you're trying to take care of somebody and something happens and things not going too well, that's like a self. And we can break down the facets of that self, different parts of the expression, like anger or specific behaviors, right? Or things that they say or things that they believe. Why am I talking about self? There was a reason why I got lost. Sometimes you're in your mind, you're like, why did I get in this place for? If we have not experienced something, we do not have the self to understand it. And if we're upset or something's going on, that self-expression is limiting future selves from being created or being manifested, whatever it is, right? And so a healthy, I'm kind of almost being metaphysical now, people criticize me on this. A healthy psychological state is one where your self-expression is growing, right? And certain selves are not, or parts of selves are not preventing the integration of future selves or the creation of new selves. So for example, what do you mean by that? So for example, I want to go to school, or you see somebody and you're like, you would do really well in school. And they're like, no, and they have all of these negative attitudes towards the educational system or money or this, that, and the other thing. And so those selves are preventing the development of a different self, right? And so the contradictory nature of those selves doesn't work out. It's like, I see it like an equation. And you can, I welcome your training in mathematics to refine my understanding of how to express this better. Part of what I want to do is create like an equation or a set of symbols and operations to express the fundamental part of my theory, and then use it to apply to these other situational elements. And I've started to, but my knowledge of mathematics is limited. So, and yeah, and if fundamentally, this is the problem, is the distinction between self and other. Because sometimes the most important thing is the you self, and the other self doesn't matter at all. And then you get these issues of hurting people and whatever hell else fucking happens. And so my solution to this problem is a social organization that really just magnifies that and looks at the properties that lead to the problems. And then we just focus on developing habits. Habits is the mechanistic part. And then the beliefs is like the guiding principle. And you need both of them. Some people, you can just explain stuff and they can train themselves, whereas other people, you need to kind of take them by the hand. And the difference is cognitive capacity, right? And we could look at examples of that. Philosophy is not meant to be in a book. The book is what was left over from the person who was there. And so we need to never let that happen again. We write books and have them, but we need to have a place where people can be together and work on the function of wisdom in the world. And then this shit wouldn't happen anymore. It's just so beneath us, I think. I think that because of our capacity. It's not like I'm saying, let's all learn to levitate. There are people out there right now that are in a group and there's some person, maybe a guy, who's like, we're going to figure out how to levitate and convinces people that this is the case. And it's like, okay, I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying that if we just put the pieces together in a way that makes sense, we can see evidence of this stuff reducing itself. And a big part of it is what do we mean by philosophy? There's a perennial issue of philosophy in itself. And in the university, their attitudes and beliefs are preventing the system from growing because they say it's only the language part. It's only beliefs. Here's a bunch of books. We're going to disagree at every point, right? And try to become the next philosopher. Maybe that's not the way, actually. It's important, and there's a certain department that needs to do that, but there's actually like a huge, large department that's missing. The majority of the pie is the being part. And the problem is that religion has taken that over. They're like, this is the way to live life. Why? And the only thing they have to say, well, somebody told me about this thing called God. Okay, what is that? Well, there's this book, and if you look in here, and they go through it, and you're like, okay, all right. And the problem is that the book doesn't correlate with reality. Because if it did, this wouldn't be happening, and mental illness wouldn't be a thing. Right? Like when you play like a perfect harmony, it fits together. It's beautiful, right? That is not the case with how religion has either reduced or increased heinous acts in the world and suffering, you know? And so we need to do something else. And it can't be something that is like oppositional to religious standpoints. It has to be integrated and deconstruct the problems of religion from within. Give the people within the community that Hamas and Israel-Palestine, and because the Putin-Kremlin thing is non-religious predominantly, whereas the Israel-Palestine is religious. So it's a great dichotomy, or a great difference between the two. But this methodology works for both of them. And so part of the thing is to give people the tools on what to do about behaviors and beliefs, right? So there's certain, so that this actually leads into the next topic that I was going to start today, but we didn't. So last week, it was a discussion about there's a means and an end, and consciousness is the thing that we use. We are conscious of things to get to certain ends, right? And that's for the individual. And we go back to our ethical principles to evaluate that stuff, right? And there are other factors that we can do, social factors, like is this behavior pro-social, right? And we go through the criteria of the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders, to say, is this good or bad? And there's a way we can go through that, right? Let's not just dismiss the DSM because they made some mistakes. I get it. But there is some value here, right? And then what we do is we construct a social organism to prevent these problems, and we build it in such a way that it doesn't, because humans, when they get into groups, they have a tendency of being super biased, dangerous, mob mentality, right? Democracy used for bad purposes, tyranny, all those things. And so we want to be able to give people the mechanism of deconstructing social groups such that an appeal to authority doesn't work. I don't really matter in this situation right now, right? I'm just the one who's saying it. It could be anybody though. Anybody could be talking about this same methodology or approach and it would still work, right? Where's the person here? This guy. Or her. Yeah, so next week it'll be, well, what do we do? How do we deal with a group of people? It's important to see visuals. And you're the person in the center. You're outnumbered, right? This has been happening since elementary school. Fuck. Ah. You know, I don't want to go back there. Your parents say you have to go back. What do I do? We don't know. You just got to go. That's where the problem begins, right? What do you say to your kids? Because if they can't figure it out on their own, they're never going to figure it out. And if you can't show it to them, right? So we're going to figure that out. And this same mechanism, I'll give you the quick answer, is you have to be greater than the group, right? By utilizing critical thinking and behavioral analysis. So there's two things. There's belief and behavior. At least for now, right? And so you can evaluate belief with critical thinking and other things, the scientific stuff, right? And so this person has a bad belief. So XB is bad belief. And then this person has a bad action. So to say action. right? Now, to a certain degree, you might have to learn self-defense, right? If there's like a violent thing, or physically put yourself in a different position so you don't get murdered or something like that. But if it's not life-threatening, then you can actually regulate the behavior of specific members because of things like the categorical imperative, right? So principle 1, what do you mean by that? The categorical imperative is from Immanuel Kant. It is to not treat people as, to not use people as a means to an end, right? To use them as ends to end in themselves, and the universalizability of property, right? So if person, I don't know, this is like person 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If person 3 does, you know, I'm just thinking, does the fundamental attribution error. So they say, you're an asshole. Or like, so this is person Z in the center. So person 3 says person Z is stupid because they didn't understand this, because they couldn't do the math problem. You're dumb, right? They're judging the character based on the behavior, when really person Z had a death in the family and just can't focus. So what you would do is you would criticize the behavior. It's a behavior belief combo in the sense of calling them stupid based on the belief. And all of the other people 1 through 7 minus 3, right, would simply agree with you because they wouldn't want that to happen to them. So what happens here is the other is really just a self. So it's O to the function of self, right? And this self is just consciousness of the self. I am conscious of myself. I am conscious of you as the other as a self, right? So the self is the fundamental denominator for humans, basically. There are variants when it comes to cognitive capacity. Some brains are compromised. When Z criticizes 3 based on this specific behavioral property, the entire group gets criticized. The group is one unit. It's a hydra, and when you cut one head off, another head pops up, right? But the behavior itself will be identified. And all you do is you just get better at responding to that specific thing. And this group will only have so many behaviors in their repertoire. And so, like, well, how do you do this for kids? That you have to practice a little bit, right? Same thing with self-defense. So once I mastered, quote unquote, physical self-defense, I wanted to learn self-defense of the mind. And that's what this is. And so when you take this like 7 people and you just increase the number, you start getting this kind of stuff, right? With Israel, Palestine, Putin, Kremlin, Hamas stuff, right? Problems of reasoning, whole bunch of things, groupthink, right? Certain biases within social contexts, and conformity, right? And so if we can have an organization that teaches people to respond to these things in the moment, then they'll be equipped to reduce the frequency of those things from occurring and or enabling them from happening. Because if behaviorally, if it occurs once and there's no consequence, then the likelihood of it happening again does kind of increase. Because there may be an internal satisfaction, right? So I kind of answered my own thing really quickly. Because I don't want to just leave it hanging. I'm like, I do know the answer. I'm not just saying that because I don't fucking know it. That's good practice for me too. But that's I think we'll go there next week, you know, because that is the most important part. And I briefly talked about it last year, but I just never got into it. Why? And the cognitive distortion stuff is important too. That's why we went through David Burns' book. Right? It's important to know what those distortions are. Because if the distortion stuff is yourself fucking with the consciousness. So then there's like the function of self, the consciousness. And what that is my own beliefs limit my perspective of reality. Right? And so there's this asymmetrical relationship between being conscious and then being self-conscious. You know? And this is what you're dealing with. You just got to accept that's the way it is. So what do we do about it? You know, the distortion stuff is super important. So Natalia knows. Natalia, ready? I'm going to challenge you.
No.
What is one distortion? Give me one.
Labeling.
Oh, she didn't believe she could do it. She said no. What's labeling?
When you put a label on what are you doing, or
It's an emotionally loaded term. Okay. Can you give me an example?
cut me on the spot.
That's good though. That's the challenge. Or try a different one.
Personalization.
What's
when
that?
you personalize, everything like toward yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you blame yourself in every situation will happen to.
Very good. Can you give me an example?
Something like
That was good. That was two. You got two just now.
that. Yeah, for example, if you have some tasks to do and there is something that you cannot change, but you apply it to yourself and feel guilty, that's the example of
Mhm.
personalization.
So when you
And
take
then you blame yourself of a bad result or something.
Mhm. When you take responsibility for things that are not in your control, right? Either the environment or other people. And then labeling would be using emotionally loaded terms to describe yourself. So remember Nancy, the bad mother, chapter 4?
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm a bad mother. And so when she calls herself a bad mother, she's labeling herself. Now she feels bad, right? And then what was the personalization? Why did she call herself a bad mother? Because her son got bad grades,
Oh yeah.
right? And then what did,
It's
what,
the one.
what did David Byrne say about her son having bad grades? He said that if he got good grades, would you take credit for him getting good grades? She's like, no. If he got good grades, that's his achievement. I wouldn't take his achievement away. And then he's like, well, then why would you take responsibility for him getting bad grades? She's like, oh. He's like, you can do everything in your power to be there for him, but ultimately his studies are his responsibility. And when you take responsibility for his achievements or failures, that's personalization. That's a distorted way to look at our relationship with other people or ourselves, how our perspective on it. Okay. Anything else? Any ideas before we go? Okay, so next week we're going to continue with the this part is where it becomes more, it's not as like theoretical, it's like arithmetic. Like you can have the theory of arithmetic. Addition is when two things come together and the end result of those two things. We could talk about quantity, right? The quantity of this, the quantity of that, and when we put them together, what is the resulting quantity? That is addition. Good? Who defines addition, right? And without it being like a weird shitty definition. And so what is addition without quantity? When you learn the theory of addition, then you practice the problems, right? And in mathematics, there's a set number of numbers. There's a set of numbers. And addition doesn't really go beyond those numbers. In this, there is an open set of weird behaviors. It's not a closed set. So for example, all of the fucky things that could happen in a social group or with yourself, if we had a catalog of all of them, it would not be exhaustive, right? So we could talk about Gödel's incompleteness theorem. There's some things going on there. So we have to use non-metonic reasoning. It has to be open to more information all the time, right? And so we can brainstorm as many kinds of weird social things that can occur, and then what the response would be in the group setting like that, where there's one versus the group. And that's the most important thing to figure out, really. Because what you want to do, I'm not stopping again, is it start out with 1 versus 7, but then after every successful behavioral or belief or combo critique, you'll slowly start to transfer over these people to your side, even though they may not physically orient themselves, but internally, right? When you look at their face, you can feel that they're resonating with you. So even if only one of them is a psychopath, right? This would be great to teach in prisons as a test. I'm gonna falsify it if I can go there. As you do a critique, slowly you're gonna have more on your side and then less on this side. And after every trial, eventually you may just have one there. And the difference is the composition of this group versus this group, right? Is this one was based on bullying and might versus right, like the abuse of power, the domination of the weak by the powerful, or whatever. Stupid human shit. Like, if you're like, what are you guys doing? It's stupid. Do some art. I don't think fucking do that, right? Go do something, right? This one is structured methodically based on the way we're interacting, utilizing principles and techniques to deconstruct the behavior or the stupid things that we say sometimes or think. And then reinforce it with, this is a better way to think. Like Nancy, the bad mother, example. Right? So as a workshop, we would have an entire workshop, just a weekly thing just on that. And then people would go to that and they would learn things and practice stuff. We would have a workshop on like limiting beliefs, right? But at least on your own, at the very basic part, you just want to take these ideas and think about them through the week and practice on your own. You gotta be able to do it by yourself. Better with a group? We're not there yet. We got this right. I need water because I've been just drinking coffee. Okay. Unless there's any other ideas before we go. Yeah.